All right, welcome everybody to our new session here at Rethink Life. To start off, we'll say a little bit about the Institute of Metaphysical Science. And we were established in 1959 as the Margaret Laird Foundation, researching, exploring, living, and teaching the science of being and the causal nature of consciousness. You can find our website at scientificmetaphysics.org. Today, we continue our exploration of government is self-government. It's really an excellent manuscript by Margaret Laird. So we continue that exploration, government is self-government, because we think it's got so much relevance to everything that we're facing today in the things that are coming up. So this specific session is called Being Accountable. And what we want to do is we want to look at being accountable, being it speaks to self-responsibility, but really we're looking at how much are you willing to own of all of it? How much are you willing to be accountable? And what does that make possible for you in your living? So that's what we want to explore. Welcome, Betty.
Thank you. Welcome.
And we start out with a couple of things. So we start out with a couple of quotes. Social conscience evolves from the understanding that the individual conscious I lives his allness as himself. Now, at any time, if you like what we're saying as this goes along, you can give us a heart or you can give us a thumbs up. You can also leave a comment. We're happy to answer any comments as they come in or address any questions, things like that. So please participate. I will go on to say, separated from love, from spiritual rationality or science, conscience becomes a policeman, an arbiter of good and evil, right and wrong. The symptoms of this dual sense of good, capital G, are bigotry, self-righteousness, and witch hunting. That which sees the evil is the conscience that makes the evil. This living or loving of one's own divinity makes conscience the voice of soul. And quoting Gibran in The Prophet, the murdered is not unaccountable for his own murder. The robbed is not blameless in being robbed. The righteous is not innocent of the deeds of the wicked. If I, in ignorance, live my I, us, as other than my own thinking, I am a living dead, a murdered growing itself a murderer, a sin growing itself a sinner, a robbed creating its robber. As we walk on, living our divinity self-consciously, the negation of our divinity in the language of sin, sickness, death will disappear. And that's all a quote from Government is Self-Government on pages 48 and 49. Betty, is there anything you would like to add to get us kicked off and started with the conversation today?
Yeah, it says that which hears the baby cry makes the baby cry. Well, you just read that which sees the evil is the conscience that makes the evil. All the way through all of her writings, Margaret Laird let us know that it was up to each one of us individually, the experiences we have in living. And a lot of us expand a lot of the time in what she called the negative, because we don't see that the thing we see in the mirror is not all there is to us. There's a divinity that shapes our ends. It's not seen, but it's there. And as that divinity, that is the being that has the look of us show up, as that divinity is honored, the look of us shapes up amazingly well. When we forget about that and think we're struggling to, like an animal, we got to rush around smartly to get everything just the way we wanted, then we get in trouble. Because it's like working with the painting and trying to change the way it looks on the canvas. You can't do it that way. You have to start with the empty canvas.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So why do you suppose it is that that we want to dodge accountability in certain ways, or we only want to own certain things but not other things. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, it isn't that we want to, basically. It's that we believe what we see as if it were outside of ourselves. If I believe you're over there and you're doing something to make me uncomfortable or comfortable, either way, then I've split myself. I've got me here and something over there beyond my control that's doing things that either is responsible for making me happy or unhappy,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And as long as I have that going on, I can't be whole. I've split myself into who I think I am here. And then there's something over there that can do something about what's over here. And I have to be careful about that.
Right. Yeah, I'm reminded of.
And in addition to that, whatever that thing over there does, I'm not responsible for that. That's their problem.
Right. Right. I remember a seminar that you gave where you said, where you're talking about, I am all. Now let's look at what we mean by all. And are we talking about all like all of a box of cereal? Or are we talking about all like all that exists or seems to exist? Everything.
Nothing left out.
And there's an absoluteness to science, isn't there? Yep. Around that. It's not a negotiation. It's not, well, I'll own this, but not that. Because any of that, anything less than the absolute all, is split in duality coming in.
Well, it's predicated on what I'm seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching, rather than on facts of being.
Right.
It's predicated, in other words, on what the look is, or the language that I've got going on. Whatever that looks like, I let that run the show instead of seeing that there's something here that hasn't looked that way.
Yeah.
And the only way that is not going to look that way is when the something here is being truly self-conscious.
Yeah.
That's all that's going on.
And it's a every minute right now practice.
Yep. And it's not easy. There's nothing about living metaphysics that's easy and simple from the human point of view. But the rewards in living is the difference between the up and down of the seesaw of good and bad and right and wrong and rich and poor and so on. It's the difference between that kind of a life and one of peace and joy and power.
Yeah.
So that you are always ready and willing to have it look however it has to look, because it doesn't have a control button out there. The control button is right here where I am.
Right. And it's kind of no matter what your world has to say, if you're standing there, if you're standing in the all.
If you're standing in the divinity of yourself.
Yeah.
And leaving the language alone.
Right. And I remind myself, because we watched King Richard, the movie, today with Serena and Venus Williams' dad. And he stood in the face of all kinds of judgment and opinions and all that stuff for what his vision was, for what could be.
What was possible.
Yeah, what was possible.
Yeah.
So it's similar to something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we dive in?
Of course.
All right. Now remember, y'all can ask questions, and you can give us a thumbs up or a heart if you like what we're doing here and how this is going, and certainly ask questions and make your comments. So here we go. All right. In Government is Self-Government, on page 48, Mrs. Laird wrote, when you are able, because of what you are divinely, to live your divinity, the right, the good, self-consciously and mindfully, you will love your neighbor as yourself, absolutely right under all circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You going to say something about that?
I was going to see if you wanted to say something about that.
Well, when you're able to live your divinity, you live your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
You live your world as yourself. You live as the one in control, the one pulling the strings, the one that says what's so.
And that's very different than blame and guilt and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And it isn't sitting in judgment on what you observe. Remember, what you observe is your comfortable language, the way that you're comfortable seeing reality. Because what's going on is reality. The fact that I see it looking like this and that and something else doesn't change the fact that the thing that has it show up at all is reality itself. How I see it is not how it is.
Mm-hmm.
How it is how it is.
Right.
And the more I'm in sync with how it is, the less problems I have with what it looks like.
Yeah. Right.
Does that sound like double talk?
No, I think that, the thing is that the concept isn't really that hard, but the living of it takes discipline like nobody's business.
Yep.
And that's that's where the rubber hits the road.
When I was talking with somebody earlier this week, I realized that what has them interested in whatever it takes to leave that concept alone and be willing to recognize the fact of themselves. If I'm present, the divine is present.
Mm-hmm.
If everything that's going on is reality present and my upset is my view of it, give up the view.
Right.
The hell with the view. Just the recognition that there is a principled event present, being itself being.
Yeah.
And the best way I can see it is this way. Well, my view is just my comfort level.
Right.
But the reality is present and is what is going on, however I'm seeing it.
Yeah.
So if I can recognize that what's going on is always divine, perfect, whole, exactly right, then what's left for me to do is leave that view alone. Like, the hell with the view. Leave it alone. Just stay with the fact that reality is present, functioning perfectly, right here, right now, no matter what I think.
Right.
But my acceptance of it as less than perfect gives me a view that's upsetting.
Yeah.
So the more I leave the view alone, the freer I am.
Yes. All right.
I wish people would ask questions because sometimes I'm not sure that I'm saying it clearly.
Right. Well, we'll just carry on. So, in Science and Health, Mary Baker Eddy on page 167 said it this way: the scientific government of the body must be attained through the divine mind. Only through radical reliance on truth can scientific healing power be realized.
Yeah. And Mrs. Laird explained radical reliance on truth a little bit because it's so misunderstood. And she wrote in this book, Government, on page 49, radical reliance on truth is to have no other gods before the me that is spirit, the I that is mind. So when I recognize the divinity that shapes my ends, that's the me that is spirit.
Right.
Not the Betty concept. The I that is mind, not the I that thinks the picture is the way it goes.
Right.
Yeah, right. It's a huge thing to look at that radical reliance on truth. A lot of people think that it means figuring out how to really shuffle around the picture to have it fit what you think of as good and healthy and strong. And it isn't that at all. The good and the healthy and the strong are what show up when you leave that stuff alone and focus on the fact that right now there's something divine present calling itself Betty.
Yeah.
And you want to listen to that. Okay.
Yep. And then in your book, Mind is the Athlete, on page 155, you say truth is unconditioned thinking out from mind or consciousness, not colored by the lens of observational phenomenon, nor influenced by language appearances.
Yep.
And that's exactly what we've been talking about.
Yep.
Because any of that is splitting in two.
Yep.
Me over here and something out there.
Yep.
Right.
And that's the way it looks, mostly because that's the best way I can see it at the moment.
Right.
When I get smarter and caught up with myself, I won't have that problem. I'll see it the way it is.
Right. Right. Okay, very good. All right, now going on, in Government is Self-Government, also on page 49, Margaret Laird wrote, in every happening, the spiritual fact, the truth, is the happening. Facts are always demonstrable. So I want to unpack the facts are always demonstrable part. Mm-hmm. So if truth is always the happening and facts are always demonstrable, you have to understand what facts are.
And you got to understand what demonstrable is.
Yeah. So let's unpack that.
Okay. Well, you know, the fundamental keynote, I guess I'd say, of this science is the mental nature of being, the divinity that's present, being all that is and all that seems to be. The trick, if I call it that, the secret from a human point of view is to recognize that the stuff I'm observing, you know, I look out there and I think, good heavens, the TV's got a war going on in Russia and Ukraine and all that stuff. We've got a NATO council. We've got millions of dollars to be spent to help people with the problem, et cetera, et cetera. All that appearance of living that really takes up our attention and our willingness really to live ourselves differently than that picture suggests. So I'm always going to have my language look. You know, my language look is my best view that I've got of what it takes to be infinite, what it takes to be all in all, what it takes to have nothing external to the being Betty, the being every conscious individual, honoring the divine as the source, not the look. So it is a discipline, and it's not particularly easy. But the thing that keeps me at the point of wanting to work with science all the time from a human point of view is that when I do, that Betty lives a life of peace and joy and power beyond anything that she could have done figuring it out from the Betty point of view, because I've tried it both ways.
Right.
You know, it is not something that I can count on unless I've given it my all from the point of view of science, because most of the time I'm giving it my all from the Betty point of view.
Right.
So then a problem comes along, and when it's oh dear, then I say, now wait a minute, now what's really going on here? This disturbing thing, it can't be God being. But you see, it's my view of God being. So then Mrs. Laird used to tell me a million times, pay attention to your seeing. So I think, oh dear, what am I seeing? And then I think, oh yeah, you're seeing it as if there's a war and people living and dying and people in need and not enough food to eat, not enough water to drink and being shot at and all that stuff. And I think to myself, well, What does believing that runs the world give me in the way of a life? And I see that it gives me a life of anxiety, a life of being uptight, no relaxation in view. I must rush around and fix and save and manage and rearrange and manipulate and organize. And it wears me out. And I can live that, and a lot of us do a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But then comes the wake-up moment. And you say, wait a minute. If there is a divinity anywhere, take a hand. I'm tired of this thing. And what you discover is sort of it almost looks like a little island of feeling well. Whatever it was is gone. You say, oh, well, okay, now what? And you move on another inch or two, and then something else comes up and go through the same thing. You get all concerned, and you get wrapped up in that picture, and then you say, no, wait a minute, there's a divinity shaping areas. Oh, that's the God idea in action. That's what really constitutes my being. And at that moment, things shift.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I find that I'm not being run by the Betty. I'm being taken care of by seeing that the divine never had a problem to begin with. No problems there. Nobody's upset, concerned. The divine is at the standpoint of perfection all the time,
Mm-hmm.
without any exception.
Right.
And when I can step into that for even a split second, it really changes the whole venue of the Betty look.
Yeah.
But until you prove it to yourself, it seems like a lot of work, and you don't know whether it's going to pay off or not.
Right.
So you have to do it yourself. Nobody can do it for you.
Right. Right. Yeah. So Sandy Jackson posted a comment. Am I not the verb action, reality being? Is this not dropping opinion and judgment and acknowledging the one thing always present, perfect, whole, and complete?
That may be your experience of it, Sandy. For each one, it's individual. See, man is the action of the God idea. So when you say verb action, of course, that's true. And reality being is all that's going on. And I live it all the time with my language, however it looks.
Mm-hmm.
And so really almost like every few minutes, I have to say, pay attention to your seeing, Betty. You got stuff going on over there. You're missing something. You've lost your purse. Whatever. You're running out of gas on the freeway, whatever, anything. In those moments is when I have to turn and say, wait a minute, what is actually present here? And I realize there's something divine, whole, perfect, needing nothing present right now.
Right.
And I just let go of the Betty, and it's always answered. We've had the experience of driving down the freeway without even being aware that we were running out of gas. We look up and said, we're out of gas, and immediately there's an off-ramp. At the foot of the off-ramp, it's a gas station.
Right.
Who knew?
Right.
We've had things like that happen all the time.
Right.
So when you've lived it and worked with it and demonstrated it in your own life, then you have a lot of confidence in letting the Betty thing alone and paying attention to what's actually present.
Right. Right. All right. So moving on, in Science and Health on page 170, Mary Baker Eddy said that this way: the demands of truth are spiritual and reach the body through mind.
Yep.
And I think that just reinforces what you've said.
Yep.
And then in Mind is the Athlete on page 155, you wrote, unconditioned thinking changes nothing real, but reveals that in reality, everything is always all right, which you just said. And then you go on and you say, Whatever actions appear to be needed are natural fallout in language, identifying the evolving presence that is perfection.
Yeah, your human life shifts because all it is your perception of reality.
Yeah.
So when you turn to the spiritual fact, your perception of reality directs the action.
Yes.
That looks like your human living.
Right.
And so it has a different look than if Betty keeps rushing around trying to do it.
Right.
And it may look like Betty does move over or adjust something, but it will be without thought taking.
Right.
It'll be just the thing to do.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. I'm gotta look this up. I think I have a page 49. 47.
You're in 51 now.
Yeah, there we go.
Yep.
So government is self-government on page 51. Whether I live myself mindfully, insightfully as life, or unmindfully, outsightfully as death, all of my living is mine.
Yep. You got no one out there to blame.
Yeah.
There's just one thing going on. Mrs. Eddy wrote, all is infinite mind and its infinite manifestation, for God is all in all.
Yeah.
And so the God idea, the all in all, whole, spiritual, perfect, is the divinity shaping humanity.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in Science and Health, Mary Baker Eddy says on page 170, spiritual causation is the one question to be considered. For more than all others, spiritual causation relates to human progress.
Yeah, and that's really a good sentence to keep in mind. If I want to straighten out my human living, I need to leave it alone and be the spiritual idea.
Yeah.
I need to just leave that alone. And that's hard to do.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And then in Mind is the Athlete on page 156, you say, or you wrote, truth does not reside in language, concepts, or identity forms, since these are simply views of reality the way we see it. In other words, we're seeing the best view of the one reality present that's possible for us and our own self-discovering, wherever that may be.
Yep. And it worked, that's not really a good word for it, but it's effective at any level. A little child can live with science beautifully. An intellectual giant can live it beautifully, and everything in between.
Right.
It's not something that requires that you be a certain way. It's something that requires that you honor your source. That's all it is. When I say, wait a minute, if the God idea in action is source, then Betty doesn't get to choose. She just shows up showing me where I'm standing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like this one statement that's right here in the on page 50, where Margaret Laird writes, I cannot be born of spirit, capital S, and get away with living outside of mind, capital M.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I told you earlier, there's a sentence that I have skipped over, I'm sure, all the times I've read this book, but it says refabrication of one's world goes on within as one's own thinking. So if I'm living divinely, it's refabricating my human living.
Yeah.
Right there.
Moment by moment, too. So you think, no, it's going this way. But when you're right there with it, boy, it can show up so differently because we think it's continuous in terms of contiguous, in terms of it's, up, up, up. But it's really right now, successive views of the one reality. And they're discontinuous. In other words, they can show up. It can shift on a dime.
Yeah. Yep.
And something new can show up if you have the eyes to see it. And you have the eyes to see it when you can be the one divinity present, be present to who you are rather than the look of yourself.
Yeah, thank you. That was right on.
Yeah. So
And
anyways, go ahead.
you know that you have found out yourself that when things get troublesome, you have a resource right where you are. You don't need another thing around. You've got a resource.
Yeah.
And when you really allow it to be the presence that you are, it does shape up the world you walk through.
Yeah.
You've had that experience, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. Many times.
Yeah. And I have too. But I tell you, give it a try wherever you are and whatever you're up to. Try it in little stuff. And you know, you will. And when you're confident that you can make that difference by just allowing your humanity to sit in the chair and be comfortable and be the divine presence. And then it's a listening, really, for what's the fact, what's really true. If there's a divinity shaping my end, what's the divine about? What does that look like? Is it at war? Is it killing? Is it sick? Is it anxious? Is it upset? Or is it whole and perfect and harmonious and joyous and free? Because as I see it divinely, it shows up humanly in my everyday living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing, is that it shows up consistent with our living of our own divinity.
That's right. Handling whatever is facing you as a need to be met.
Right. And so I would say that being accountable is all about being fully 100%. I am all. Be accountable. And this next week, just take it on with little things and see what shows up in your own living. And we'll be back here next week at 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central. And we will be here on, what's the topic?
Revelation, creation.
Yeah, Revelation, creation. So we're going to be taking a whole nother tack on this whole thing. So we look forward to seeing you then next Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central. And until then, be accountable. See what shows up.
And let us hear from you.